Welcome to Salvage, a podcast for conversations with artists about the repurposed materials they use in their art practice. Hello. Coming up is my conversation with artist Lisa Barthelson. Originally a painter, Lisa currently explores and works in many media: printmaking, ceramics, photography, encaustic, site-specific environmental installations and sculpture, mixed media, and found object assemblage. She looks at everything as a potential art medium, a material to be used and transformed. From traditional art making materials, paint, pencil, printmaking ink, paper, wax, and clay, to the debris we generate in the course of our daily lives and then throw it out. It all excites Lisa. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast. I was so jazzed a few months ago when you agreed to speak to the Repurposer Collective. That was just, I'm ever so grateful for that. We had such a fun discussion and everybody really enjoyed your presentation. And even people who listened to it afterwards or watched it afterwards have mentioned how much they enjoyed it. So thank you.
It was a great experience for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for agreeing to do part two, I guess.
Well, I'm honored because I have watched some of these episodes, and
good.
Some of my favorite artists have been interviewed. So I am honored. Thank you.
Oh, great. Great. Okay, now I want to know, who were your favorite artists?
Well, one of them is Michelle Luigi, who I know personally, and that, everything else is going to slip out of my head. Well, I think maybe Rebecca.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
they're both close to you.
Right. And they're friends of mine. So I particularly enjoyed watching them and some other ones. And now I won't remember their names, but those people that I personally know, it's stuck in my mind.
Oh, good. I'm sure they'll enjoy your interview as well. I hope.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start at the very beginning. Were you an artist as a kid?
Yes. My parents were artists.
Oh, okay.
And my sisters were artists. So I grew up in a family of artists. My parents met in art school at Syracuse University.
Oh, okay.
So my father was a commercial artist and art director. My mother worked at many jobs while we were growing up, none of them art related, and really started to make art with a lot of vigor later in life, again, when she moved to Connecticut after my parents divorced, and looked forward to making a lot of art after she retired. But unfortunately, at some point, she had dementia. Oh. So that was lost. So I often feel that I'm realizing her dreams in many ways, and I feel her with me. So, and she was a wonderful, very talented artist. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh. So what kind of art did you make when you were a kid?
Well, because my father was a commercial artist, we had the best art materials of anybody around. So when we had a project, our goal was to keep my father's hands off it. Because I do remember some of the early projects, particularly from my older sister. He did a Roman road, he did like a Navajo Hogan that were like, commercial grade. So so we used whatever we had at hand, a lot of drawing, a lot of card making. My father also made personal cards for our family. So we always made cards for each other.
Oh, that's great.
And art for each other. I can remember doing sketches of my sisters, not necessarily complimentary. But I think all three of us, I have two sisters, we all grew up sort of viewed as the Barthelson girls, artists, which I'll admit when I was in high school, I found to be a little bit of a burden and annoying because I was a teenager,
Right, of course.
But I do remember, all through elementary school and high school, that's how we were considered, artists. So
could be worse.
Well, and I did my first painting at 5 or 6 on the picnic table. It was on a canvas board with oil paint and turp. So I sort of laugh at this now because I have 3 kids. I don't think I'd be sending them out to the picnic table with oil paint and turp. So I have two of those paintings, my little scratchy writing,
Oh,
Lisa
that's so
6.
wonderful that you still have them.
I do have. But, so I don't think there were any boundaries. And I look back, as you know, as we all know, a lot of those art materials were toxic.
Mhm.
And one of our favorite things was to put rubber cement on our hands and roll it up into balls,
Yep.
which you would never do that now, but that's what we did.
No, but that just you saying that sentence vividly brings up the smell of rubber cement. I
Oh,
can
yeah.
smell it right now.
It was the greatest stuff.
Yeah,
So, and Duco cement, all of this stuff is really toxic, but that's how we grew up.
that's awesome. And did you go to school for art as well afterwards?
Well, that's its own story. I did go to school for art. I applied as an art major, and I got, well, it's a long story. I had an accident in California where I was living to become a resident so that I could go to school for free because my parents really didn't have the funds for college.
Mm.
I had an accident. I came back and I ended up going to University of Connecticut and I started as a fine arts major, but the way I was getting through college was to waitress, bartend, and to have work study and small loans. So being the weirdly responsible or pragmatic kid I was then, I was concerned about getting out of college and not having a way to pay off those loans.
Mm.
I had no illusions because I'd seen my parents struggle. And I decided that I would find something that was art related that was a profession. So I would get a job as a professional when I got out. So
Okay.
I changed my major to environmental design with a focus on landscape architecture.
Oh, wow.
So I graduated with a BS, Bachelor of Science, in environmental design. And when I got out, it was a recession and I could not find a job. So I went back to bartending.
Oh, best laid plans.
And then I went to graduate school to get my MLA, Masters of Landscape Architecture at UMass Amherst. Again, working in a restaurant, with small loans. And I got out, there was a recession, and I couldn't find a job again. And
Oh, goodness.
to get your professional registration, you had to work for a registered landscape architect for a certain number of years, and then you could take the professional registration exam, which was 2 days, like 6 or 8 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
And so eventually I begged someone to hire me. And I told them, you can test me out for a month. If you want to fire me after that, that's fine. All this stuff. And in the meantime, my husband was in law school. So we really did not have any money.
Oh, my goodness.
And eventually I stayed for a year and then I just kept working at different places. Like many professions, when you leave, you up your salary.
Yes.
Salary and your responsibilities. So I moved around a bit and I did that for probably over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was doing that, I made art, because art was integrated into my life.
Right.
Nothing fabulous, but
What kind of art were you making?
Painting, mostly painting,
Uh-huh.
because it was something I could do at my drafting table. And there is a lot of drawing and layout in landscape architecture.
Right.
A lot of the sketching, it's all what I considered art and design, functional art, form and function. But for me, I would do things like painting. You probably find this. I think most artists feel like they need to make art to sort of stay sane and grounded and happy.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do that.
No, I'm glad you had that opportunity.
Yeah.
Sometimes life gets in the way and you don't have that opportunity. So I'm glad you did.
Well, you find little ways to do it.
Yeah.
When I was raising my kids, I would take courses because that was a way for me to tell my family that I would be away for this chunk of time.
Yeah.
And to schedule it in. And then I'd come home and say I had homework. But that also opened a lot of doors because I took ceramics, things. I took photography, painting with lots of different people, printmaking. So it was a way to keep working and stay sane. Particularly ceramics. When my kids were younger, I would go on Friday nights and pound clay with a group of fabulous women who also had children. And we'd talk about our week. We'd hand build, we'd make ceramics. And I did that probably for at least 10 years at the Worcester Center for Crafts. And it was a lifeline.
Yeah.
It was a creative outlet. So
that's
so
awesome.
that's how I did it.
We all have our ways.
Right.
Wow. So I was looking on your website earlier, and I remember that we talked specifically about your family debris series when you spoke to the Repurposer Collective. But what I didn't realize at that time, I guess I didn't dive deeply into your website enough, is that has been going on for decades now.
15 or 16 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. It started because my kids were getting older and I was trying to purge some of their stuff. I was faced with the realization that we had so much stuff. I was shocked, because you have 3 kids, 3 different rooms. I just was appalled because, as I sort of mentioned earlier, that's not how I grew up.
Right.
We didn't have all that money. It wasn't all about acquisition. You waited, it wasn't sort of instant gratification. But somehow I bought into that, whether was the climate of the time. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So I was really pretty appalled. I tried to donate some of it. At that time, there was a different ethos. So people didn't want old stuff, which is really weird to me now. Goodwill would take it. But a lot of it was plastic. And I knew that it was what I called in my statement, archival to a fault. It was going to be around forever.
I like that, archival to a fault.
Yeah. So I thought, well, as an artist, I'm always looking for materials. I'm always looking for things to make other things with. So why not embrace this debris and start to explore making art with it? And I think I mentioned in our earlier meeting, the first one I did was Duplo blocks, which are the young kids' version of Lego blocks, which will never deteriorate. No. I mean, they'll be around after we're long gone. So at the time I was really obsessed. Well, I've always been obsessed with circles, the circular form. And what follows is the O. And for some reason at that point out, I noticed that there were 1 million compound words and phrases with the word out. So I started, this is an artist's approach to living. I started obsessively listing them. Because it was sort of a discovery, and I like wordplay, I like text. Mm-hmm. So I made a child-sized chair out of Duplos, painted it black, and then scratched these words with out into it, calling it the timeout chair. And I put phrases and compound words that I thought related to childhood and to me, out of my mind. They were endless. And it was very therapeutic. The chair is almost like on a little throne. And that was my first family debris piece. And weirdly, it came to me, you may experience this, I have multiple times, sort of, it appeared in my mind fully formed.
Oh, wow.
And usually when that happens, the end result or the product does not resemble that first thing. But that piece did. So when you scratch into the black paint, it was like scratch board that we played with as kids. And it got into a show. So that sort of sent me off on the world of family debris. And it was a long time ago. And people are using repurposed materials all the time now, but not then, not very much then.
It was rare. I remember that because I was always interested in repurposed materials. And even 15 years ago, I was sort of looking into it.
Yeah.
I mean, the internet wasn't what it is now, so it wasn't as easy to find. But I do remember that was not, it was not ubiquitous.
Right.
It was just, it was rare.
Right. Repurposing your family stuff has it's like a family archive. It's a family history. You've already purchased it, so you own it. That's right. Which is a good thing. You're not buying something else. I did set parameters, and that is that as I became more well-known for using repurposed and recycled materials, people are always offering them to me, always.
Yeah.
And the one parameter is I only use what I already own. I only use my own stuff. with a couple of exceptions, a couple. But, my husband's very patient. People go, so are you a hoarder? Is your house filled to the top? And no, not really. I do have a lot of stuff. It's very well organized, but I do have a lot. But sometimes as things are going out the door, I'll notice there are a lot of things that sort of catch my eye. And then I will start collecting them specifically, like toothbrushes at one point, plastic cards that for a while were ubiquitous and came in everything. We talked about this, contact lens pods. Yeah. So sometimes certain things will catch my eye. I'm like, okay, I can envision using those in something and I'm going to hang on to them. I hang on to a lot of plastic packaging, plastic, a lot of food comes in plastic bags. We talked about this before, organic food in plastic.
Yeah.
Really? So I save that stuff. And as you and I and a lot of people have recognized how ubiquitous and devastating and toxic plastic is, I've made more of an effort to save that, which is a little bit painful, but I feel like it should be reused.
Yeah.
And also, as you know, it deteriorates at different rates.
Yeah.
I've done some early work over 10 years ago. It has a lot of caps and tops, and some of them do begin to break down, and then I replace them. I hang on to the stuff. It's right. Sort of its own, craziness.
It is. But I think we all artists, no matter what media we use, there's a certain amount of craziness involved. And we just I think we have to cherish that craziness because it makes us who we are.
Yeah. And aren't we lucky? Yeah. I mean, to feel comfort and passion. That's how I would say. And joy in the making, and struggle and pain.
Yeah. Get it all.
It all is, it's an honor to be able to have that shape our lives, I think. And I have friends who don't have that. And they've talked a lot to me about how, I hate to use the word envy, but how envious they are that I do feel passionate about making art. And, if you don't have something like that, you got to find something.
I agree. I think you need to, and it could be something, I don't know, it could be a passion for reading, for goodness sake.
Or running, or, anything. Or for your family. I think, or for volunteering. But I feel very much, I'm not a loner, but I do have loner tendencies. So I do like my own company.
Yeah.
And I think probably most artists feel that way. I do collaborate from time to time. I haven't recently, and I do find that has huge benefits and sort of an exponential increase of energy in some interesting way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I crave my alone time. I love that in my studio. It could be hours that I'm all alone and just, tinkering, whether I'm working on something specific or I'm just cleaning my studio or organizing my supplies. I enjoy that.
Which is a good thing. Sorting is a fun thing.
That's right. Sorting is important.
We learn it in kindergarten.
Yeah, sorting sometimes leads to a lot of trouble because as I'm sorting, I'm noticing things and I'm like, oh, I know what I want to make from this. And then the sorting stops.
It's okay. It's good. It's inspiration.
Yes, absolutely. So your family debris series, like how large is it? You've had some immersive installations.
Yes,
series.
It's big. Artists have one particular problem, and I certainly suffer from it, and that's storage. Especially if you make sculpture or anything three-dimensional.
Yeah.
I do have a tendency to take apart old work, particularly sculpture, and reuse the pieces in other ways, which is also an adventure and fun. I like that. So the immersive show that you mentioned, I used a lot of pieces from they're all family debris pieces, but from different shows, and I, made new work. So it was a coming together. I had another show at a gallery that no longer exists where I had them dump a truckload of stuff from my garage. I'm embarrassed to say that, but yeah, our garage does not hold cars. In the gallery, and I had a week to put together a show. I did enlist my sister and a couple other people for labor and assistance, but it was a challenge. I had shown in that gallery many times. In fact, my studio at that point was downstairs from this giant, wonderful gallery called the Sprinkler Factory, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But it was something I always dreamt about, that I wanted the whole space, and it was overwhelming.
But exciting, I bet.
It was very exciting. It was, the culmination of internal, design and creativity that have been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a lot of family debris stuff.
But but it's very varied. Like there's sculptures, and those are the most, I think, I don't know that I want to use the word powerful, but I guess they're the most
catch the most
statement
attention.
making. Yes, they draw the most attention. But you also do monoprints and encaustics within this series. How does that work?
Well, I've been a printmaker. I was a painter for a long time, and when I had kids, I didn't want to paint with turp. I didn't have a studio at the time, but I didn't want to paint with oil paint or turp in my house. So I needed to find an alternative. So I knew friends who were part of the Blackstone Print Studio, which was a cooperative. And I had printed in high school, but not since. So I became a part of that. And I think that was in the 90s, the late 90s. And I started printing. And initially I was doing things when my mother died. I did a lot of things from photographs that she had. I did a lot of stuff with circles, always. It's always been there.
We're going to circle back to circles later.
Exactly. A lot about circles. And then when I really started getting going on the family debris series, I collected flat materials and things that had a little bit of dimension. So I would ink a large plexi plate, and I'd place them randomly, maybe not randomly, on the plate. And I use a kind of paper called Reef BFK, which is a really thick rag, nice paper, dampen it, use sort of a foam blanket over it, and put it through the press. So then I get sort of embossed items and sort of silhouettes or solid forms of them. And you could get 3 or 4 passes with the same inked plate, because you would shift things around, you turn them over. Mm-hmm. So you'd end up with 4 images. And then I do another color with the same prints. So I started to layer the family debris. In a way, I thought about it later. It's almost as you might find it in a landfill. But what I liked about it is that people, when you first came in and saw the work, it was pretty much an abstract color, form, shape thing. Mm-hmm. And if you went closer and looked carefully, you could begin to pick out objects that were familiar to you.
Yeah.
And so it was another degree of interaction and recognition. And again, family debris, things that everybody has. I've been doing that for a really long time. And then I started to make them larger, and I started to make sculptures out of them where I print on both sides, and I create paper sculpture forms, stitching them together. All of my prints for the last, 10 plus years, I usually collage printed materials. Like I don't, just like everything else, I don't waste anything. Uh-huh. So if at the end of a print session, I have ink on my plate, I'll take some paper and get that ink with its texture on that paper. Or if I cut or shape some print, I'll use it somewhere else as collage.
So what about the materials that you ink?
I save them, number one, and sometimes I collage them onto the prints at the end because they have an inked patina.
Right.
So it's that whole use it all, or mm-hmm. I say waste not, want not, which a lot of people say, but that is sort of my approach. And you'd be surprised at how many times the things at the end of a print session, like those color blocks or those colored pieces of paper, sometimes I'll add texture to them, are sort of the stepping off point of a whole new batch of work.
I love that.
So I really, I love it. And I love printmaking. I've been talking about this. I maybe talked to you about this. I'm to the point where I do miss painting because it's a gestural, large movement. And everything I do is very small, repetitive. I stitch on my prints. I love stitching on my prints. And that's sort of a meditative thing, collaging. But I do miss that big gestural thing. So I may do something in my studio, not necessarily for human consumption or for anyone to see.
No, I have some painter friends, and I love watching videos of them on Instagram, and they're painting and they're all these big movements, and I get a little jealous of that. Yeah.
Well, this is what I would say to do, because this is what I've been doing. I will put a big piece of paper on my wall in my studio, and it's like a respite or taking a break, and I'll just make marks on it.
Oh, I like that.
And, whether anything useful will come out of it doesn't really matter as much as it's very freeing. And you get to explore color and mark making. And it's like taking a little vacation from your, closer work. And I started doing that when I would go on residencies, because you have more space there in my studio. And I would use a drop cloth. I'd put a drop cloth on the wall and just sort of play with it. And it's satisfying, know. It's not a great work of art, but it's satisfying.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm so a friend has asked me to do some painting for him for some samples. I'm actually looking forward to it, because it's not going to be something that I'll display in a gallery or even think about it. But I'm looking forward to just playing with some paint in the future. Because really my paint these days is maybe for the edges of an artwork, or a little bit, in the artwork, but very little. So
you're ready. It's time.
Why not? I'll play with it. We'll see what happens.
And that is why a lot of the family debris is a diverse body of work. It has printmaking, it has mixed media, it has sculpture, and it has installation. Because being the selfish artist I am, I want to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's not just one thing. I don't have a gallery. Well, I'm participating in some galleries, but, I don't want to keep making the same thing over.
No, absolutely. I agree with that. I mean, there's so many teachers or critics or whatever that tell you that you have to pick a niche. I think about it sometimes. I'm like, but if I do pick a niche, then I can't do that other thing that I really enjoy doing.
Right. We're very fortunate that we can do that, a broad spectrum of, or broad range of work. Not everyone has that option. And I do recognize that, every now and then I meet another artist who goes, I just want to make what I want to make. And I'm like, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about encaustic. Now, I know nothing about encaustic, have never tried it, but I do understand it's a wax process.
Right.
But you're using it with family debris.
That's older work, and I did go through a whole period, and that was the period where I was dealing a lot with old toys. I took a class, an encaustic class, because a lot of people were working in encaustic at the time, and it's beeswax and pine rosin together. It's a certain formulation. It smells great. It's translucent and has a beautiful sort of depth to it. I used it to create scenarios or vignettes. The first two that I made were really the tiniest bits of toys that I found under the bed, in a drawer, like all that crap that is from something else, like broken bits, or my kids like lots of tiny little things. So I made little vignettes. No one would ever recognize them, but I placed them in the wax. And when you work with encaustic, you have to fuse it. It's a layered approach. So you fuse it to harden it. And it takes a lot of time. But you have to keep it within a certain temperature range so that it doesn't give off toxic fumes. Plus, you need to have very good ventilation.
Okay.
Did I have those things? I'm not sure I did. So I went through a whole period where I used toys in different ways. How we talked about sometimes work comes to you fully formed. I had a show coming up and I was doing all these encaustic pieces, and one late night I made 3 that were just sort of came out of me.
Mhm.
The next day I looked at them and I completely understood what they were, but at the time I was making them now. I made one that was called, I don't remember the first one. The second one was Raise and Launch. So the first one sort of made a nod to creating a baby and toys. And then the second one was raising the baby, or the child. And then the third one was launching the child. So the first one, the encaustic, was white and pearly. The second one, it was blue. And the third one, it was sort of black, like you were launching them out into space. I don't know where that came from, but they were completely made by the next morning. I stayed up really late. So sometimes things just come.
Yes.
And then I used some of my kids' old toys, again, to talk about childhood. One, I used little plastic toys, like furniture that I have two girls had, and it was called Abandoned Rooms. And then one, I used a lot of different cars that all my kids had, not just my son. And I think it was called Empty Lots. And then I had all this miscellaneous stuff left over, and I put them in a grid, and I think I called them Unexplained Human Beings and Food, something weird. So I would do them in series, and I really liked them. I enjoyed making them, but I'll be honest, I didn't necessarily feel great at some point. I was like, I still have all my encaustic stuff, and I'll go back to it at some point. I keep thinking that the next time I do it, I'll make it outside. I thought I had good ventilation, but I'm not sure if I did.
Yeah. So I have to ask an related but unrelated questions. Did your children ever protest your use of their materials?
Well, that's a very good question and a very interesting answer. So my oldest, as she was cleaning up, she would give me black plastic bags of stuff to get rid of. And at this point, I was looking at stuff for making art. So I used it. And she came to a show and she was upset. And I still feel badly about this. I should have asked her, but in my mind, she had identified it as garbage.
Mm-hmm.
So I used it. And I think she felt that it was invasive. Not that I had her name attached to it. Right. For whatever reason, it bothered her. And I felt really badly. And I felt like as a mother, I really should have run it by her. So that was my oldest. My middle child, who's a boy, loves it. I actually just gave him one of the pieces. He just liked it. Mm-hmm. And my youngest, who's a girl, kept bringing me her current toys and going, how about this? How about this? Like she wanted to participate. So that's three different kids, three different reactions.
That's so fun.
But it was very eye-opening to me, because even if you think it's not personal, someone's garbage is personal.
Yeah.
So when I use the family debris, they now know that, stuff that's left is going to end up in the family debris series.
So now they know if it's something they don't want to wind up there, they're not going to give it to you.
That's right. And I use a lot of textile and clothes also. Mm-hmm. And they don't really care about that. I try to give away a lot of the clothes, but sometimes the color, the pattern, I'll use it. There's so much history with those things. Almost more with the clothes than the toys for me, because this is what I purchased. This is what they wore. I remember the ages they were.
Exactly.
So that's like walking down memory lane. And it's very revelatory to me what their own personal palettes were. Because they did have them, you know. So it's like it is revisiting. There's a lot of pleasure in the family debris thing. Yeah, I'm appalled. I used to call it pleasurable penance, making this art. But that seems a little, I don't know. Seems not kind. It seems a little cheeky. So I don't say that as often, but in a lot of ways, that's what it is. It's pleasurable penance. It's a way for me to examine everything that we bought. I don't know how you grew up, but that was not how I grew up.
No, that is not how we grew up. I grew up at all.
Yeah, I mean, completely. And maybe that's part of what fueled it. I actually have tried to figure out, when you have three kids, it's just so busy. You're just like, nothing is really registered. That's the other thing. And maybe there is a little underlying, I didn't have that opportunity, or I don't know.
I think that's true, because we grew up, my brother is 6 years younger than me, but we grew up not having much.
Yeah.
My parents worked very hard and didn't have a lot. So everything that we did get was pretty precious. And I
Right.
think that when I was raising my two girls, we had a much wealthier, I should say, lifestyle
Right.
than I did growing up. So
Yeah.
I think part of it was because I was like, I didn't have that, but you can have it.
Right.
So
Right.
part of it is, I'm sure, is my fault.
Though that wasn't conscious at the time. I'm sure you
No,
weren't thinking that. It's
no.
just like a behavior.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
But it's
It's
funny because when we were moving and we had a downsize and they were about to go to college or college was in the near future, but we had to downsize from the home that they grew up in. And that was rather difficult for them,
yeah. Yeah.
more difficult than it was for me, even though I did most
Yeah.
of the physical work.
Right. Well, I do think that, and I recognize this now, my kids are young adults and they're still in the acquisition phase of their lives.
That's true.
And I'm in the deaccessioning part
Yeah.
of my life. So it's easier for me to say, get rid of it. But it's still so loaded with emotion and childhood for them. It's hard for them to
Yeah.
do. And I think at that point, they don't even know what they still want. So I am hanging on to like books and
Yeah.
things like that because I do think it will become more of an issue as they have children.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's true.
Yeah.
We have boxes in storage,
Yeah.
which now haven't been looked at in probably close to 3 years and probably
Right.
will not get looked at for another 10 years or so,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Hold on to them for now.
So, I do feel like, there is this whole issue of being a mother and making art is a very difficult thing. And I think it has more attention now than ever.
Hmm.
And I appreciate that because, I have a friend, whenever I mention a very successful, groundbreaking female artist will instantly say to me, does she have kids?
But
So
it's true.
it is true.
Yeah,
But I do think, I see some younger female artists right now who are making it work and really saying that it has an important place for them and
yeah,
they're going to figure out a way to do it. And I encourage them.
yeah. No, I agree. I encourage them too. I sometimes think back to my own younger years and
Yeah.
think, oh, I should have done more. Why didn't I pursue that? I don't know, life circumstances,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
different times,
I
so
did things like paint scenery for my kids or paint things for prom walls.
oh
You
yeah,
do
yeah, I did
whatever
costumes
you
for my
can.
kids' school plays. I mean,
Exactly.
really outrageous costumes.
Yeah. Well,
Enjoyed every moment of it.
yeah. And they'll remember that. So, you do what you can do.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, we're fortunate. We're doing it.
Yes, exactly. All right, I have one more question. Well, I have two more questions. So you do some environmental sculpture as well, outdoor
Right.
sculpture.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, actually the second or third family debris piece that I made was called Found Nest after ice storm. We had a very historic ice storm in my area where almost every tree lost its top. The roads were blocked. We didn't have electricity for 7 or 8 days. The whole yard was just covered with debris. So there was a program called Art in the Park in Worcester, and I always wanted to do an outdoor piece. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use some of these down branches. So I made a very large scale nest. And then I took rocks from the side of the road and wrapped them in some of the inner part of the downed electrical cables. So it was very colorful. And that was my first outdoor piece.
Oh, wow.
Um, and kids love to sit in it. So I'd have to come and sort of lift up the sides again. But that's fine. And then after that, I think it was the following year, I did probably one of my favorite. This is less sort of an environmentally sensitive piece, but it was something that was in my mind. It had to do with household materials. We live in an old house, and I had seen the silver aluminum duct that went from the dryer to the outside. It was very long. And I loved it. Again, circular, like a slinky. I also have a big history with slinkies. And I was like, oh, this is a great material. So what I had noticed at Art in the Park was that a lot of the work was vulnerable because, it's in a city, people do stuff. Mm-hmm. So I thought, I'll put it in the ponds, they'll be completely safe. So I got some post-consumer styrofoam that a business had gotten new computers and had a ton of it, stuffed these tubes, clamped them, and made rings, 57 of them.
Oh my gosh.
And balls. I used old play balls that my kids had and wrapped them in silver emergency blankets and with hair ties and put them with an old pantyhose to a paracord and then to a cinder block so that they sort of moved around on the surface, which was really nice.
Was that it was sunk.
Right. So it was called the Water Rings and Bubbles. And you could see it from the road and the rings would just move around.
Oh, I love that.
And it was, well, the best part was I experimented in my neighborhood. We had a pond nearby. So I got some waders and I installed these on this little pond. I'd walk across the road. The people next door to us were trying to sell their house. I'd be like, just let me know. I won't walk down the road in my waders with my, and that was its own environmental experience because I'd be there at the end of the day and one little bullfrog would start to make noise and then another and then another. And it would be this crescendo of sound that actually vibrated my head because I'd been there so long and it was dark and I was standing still. It was a profound experience.
Oh, wow.
So that was part of probably the best environmental part. So I've made a couple of outside things. So lately I've been using plastic. Because again, I want to bring attention to how ubiquitous.
How is the plastic surviving outdoors, or are they not there for very long?
They're all temporary pieces. Okay. They're there for a couple of months. But I am dealing with repurposing. I had done a piece in Concord where I asked people to bring in their recyclable plastic to the Umbrella Art Center for 2 weeks. And then I made a plastic wave out of it.
Yes.
It was big. And now I'm repurposing that plastic. So I'm reusing plastic. So yeah, I like doing stuff outside. We have what I call the sculpture graveyard, which is old pieces around my house, much to my husband's dismay. But I'm surprised at how they last.
Yeah.
And some of them I've reused in different ways, but some of them are just like, well, the nest I put in my garden, and it was very exciting because I watched it decompose, and that was what was supposed to happen,
right?
And
because there were branches.
Yeah. So that was really eye-opening to me, and I like that sort of possibility of ephemeral art, not with plastic though. Plastic becomes microplastic, which is inside of us. So that is one thing I wanted to say. Initially all of the family debris came out of sort of this personal penance for our personal consumption and not wanting to put it back out into the world. But in those 16 years, climate change, we're witnessing it, we're living it.
Yep.
So my concern is broadened from the personal to the global. I want people to look at my work and say, oh, I have all that stuff, and consumerism fuels climate change because all of it emits greenhouse gases. So, I have this struggle because I want it to be visually engaging. I want to get their attention. And some people will just brush it off and go, oh, that's so pretty, or oh, that's so colorful. Okay,
well,
they're
that's
not
where
looking.
You get their attention is by the pretty and the colorful.
Right. So if they want to take a little more time with it, they'll understand. For example, the installation had the soundtrack of nature because I wanted people to realize that if we continue with this kind of immersion of plastic, that will be lost, that will be gone. It will be a recording.
Yeah.
It won't be real. So in that way, my work I hope has a bigger reach. I hope it's gotten beyond where people go, oh, I will say this, kids and young adults love my work because they recognize the
Yeah.
components. Oh, I had that Polly Pocket, I had that Matchbox. So, and that's good because again, it gets their attention, but I really want people to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And I think you're doing that also. And I think we all struggle with, well, how do we do that? How do we really do that?
Yeah, I think we just got
Answers?
to keep doing it. That's the key.
Yeah,
That's the key. Yeah, I know. It's a struggle. One more
sure,
question.
sure.
So tell me about your circles. I know you love circles.
Right.
You have this really wonderful circling around series that you post on Instagram.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, again, I do love circles, and we could get into a whole discussion about what a circle means universally and personally. But, it's the purity of form, it's the curvilinear nature, it's the ultimate symmetry, it's centering, it's inclusion, it's
Mm.
exclusion. There's so many things, center on the circle. So I like to spend time outside. I like to walk. And I began to notice that nature has circles or arcs or curves. And I started taking pictures of them, not just nature, but, urban situations. So I started to take pictures of them and post them in a blog in 2011. At that point, it was called Daily Rounds, but I was like, that sounds like I'm a doctor. So I got rid of that title. So I started calling it Circling Round. And I think for the first year, I posted one every day. That was my own personal challenge. And then I sort of slowed down, and people are like, I really missed your circle. I really missed your circle. So I kept doing it, but I gave myself permission not to do it every day because I didn't want to spend my time looking for circles. I wanted to experience or find them as I moved through my day. So that was, I think it was 2011.
Mm.
And then at some point, blogs were less prominent, and I started to post them on Facebook. And that got a bigger audience. So I always put circling round the date, not always, but usually, and 3 lines that I don't think anyone reads them. I put them in to give people a sense of how I was feeling or where I found it or what the weather was, just sort of context.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people respond to them. Some people probably know me more for the circling round posts than anything I do. And I'll laugh to my husband. My circling round got like way more likes than any of my art does, which is fine.
But they're lovely. Like I saw the one that you posted this morning, and there was quite a few pictures in there.
Yeah.
And I obviously can't recall them all, but I'm recalling the 2 that really, I guess, grabbed my attention was a branch with the droplets,
Yeah.
and it's a V-shaped
Yeah.
branch. And then the other one was the melting snow. So I'm assuming they were like
The little
the
drops
little
from the,
divots
yeah.
in the melting snow. Like
Yeah.
there was just something very delicate and poetic about them.
Well, it's ephemeral art, which I like, particularly after my mother was ill. I recognized that part of the end of life experience is that you are almost hermetically sealed somewhere. You can't get out, you can't move through the world. And I do love landscape architect. And I decided at that point in time, I'm going to make an effort to spend some time outside every day if I can. And I used to be a runner. I'm older now, so I walk. I love to walk. I love to move through the landscape. I love to experience the landscape. I love sort of registering the change in light, season, time of day, all of that.
Yeah.
So what happened to the circling round is it transformed from actual circles, arcs, which there still are a lot, to a metaphorical circling round of me walking through the landscape and starting in one place and coming back. And what I see, sharing what I see. Sometimes some pictures are more successful than others. And I just want people to get a sense of what it was like to be outside. Also, I like to encourage people, oh, you're so lucky. Yeah, I can go outside now more than I could in the past because I'm not working full time. It does fuel everything I do, and it's sort of the backdrop to environmental art or climate art or how things change, how we interact with nature, all that nature gives us. I mean, a lot of the stuff I'll post is patterns. I mean, and abstractions. Nature does it better than we than we do. And the randomness of it. So, at times I won't do very many circling rounds, and like today's was an accumulation of a couple of days walking.
Yeah.
And I do love fog.
Oh,
Fog is just
so wonderful.
fog is wonderful. So, in my mind, often they were two separate practices, but more than one person has said to me, no, they really do respond to each other. They interact. A lot of my artwork is with man-made stuff.
Yes.
So this is.
And there's circles. There are so many circles in your artwork.
Oh, yeah. Can't get enough of those circles. No. But yeah, so I appreciate you asking me about that. And I will probably always do that because I like to take pictures when I walk. I can't capture everything I see, not at all.
That would be impossible.
Yeah, sometimes I hit the right note, and sometimes it's not like a great picture, but it gives you a sense of what I'm experiencing. Yeah. And I like that. So. Yeah.
No, they're wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Lisa. I really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed it too, Natalia. And I look forward to, I don't know how you do all of what you do, by the way.
Well, we can talk about that another time.
Yes, we will sometime. But, we all work hard and long, and people say that to me, but I don't see that. But you do a lot.
Oh, and thank you. I appreciate. I'm always in awe of people like you who do so much. I mean, we all do what we can and what we are passionate about. So, and everyone's passions are different. So,
but you generously share all this information that you discover along the way and share people. That's open the doors so we meet people and artists that we won't necessarily know, and that's a great thing. So thank you.
I think that's important because there's so many of us, and sometimes we get, especially for climate artists, I think sometimes we can get into a depressive state because things are so bleak at times.
Yes.
That's why I think it's important for all of us to know how many of us are out there, that we're not alone in this.
That would be a good forum, by the way, to have a group of climate artists talk about how do we reach people. Like, we all do different kind of art, but all with the same goal. So what's working, what's not, how can we consolidate that information and really make, I don't know.
I don't know, but I think there's a symposium in there somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, listen, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. This was great. That was such a great conversation. We could have kept talking for another couple hours, I think. I especially loved Lisa's line, archival to a fault. I may have to steal that for myself from now on. Maybe it'll be a title for next artwork. We'll see. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you are enjoying season 2 of Salvage. I am so delighted to be able to have these wonderful conversations with so many people. So I invite you to take a look at my art at artbynatalia.com. I invite you to take a look of what you can learn with me at ecoloop.art. And I also invite you, if you're interested in being a repurposed material artist yourself, to join the Repurposer Collective. To do so, go to repurposercollective.com and put your name on the wait list. The doors will open for Earth Month. That's April. I'll see you there. This podcast was created, produced, and edited by me, Natalia Korover. Theme music by R.C. Gaida.